Not sure if you know this, but there's this anime called Attack on Titan that just ended, which is kind of a big deal. Alright, so as you know, the final episode of Attack on Titan released a few days ago, putting an end to the anime's 10-year run. Throughout those years, Attack on Titan has developed a reputation for remarkably consistent quality across the board. This reputation was partially because of the amazing staff behind the show. At the helm was Wit Studio, now known for their excellent lighting, action sequences, and the way they bring characters and scenery to life. Since the start of Season 4, the animation was passed to Studio Mappa, who continued the legacy of quality animation. Behind the original soundtrack was Hiroyuki Sawano, a prolific composer who gained massive popularity from his work in the show. And Linked Horizon, famous for songs such as and as well as many more musicians as the series went on. The other half of the show's good reputation came from the intrigue of its mysterious writing, captivating plot, and nuanced characters, all of which are the work of Mr. Hajime Isayama, the author of the manga. Altogether, these factors result in an anime series that has very consistent quality. The quality was consistent for so long that Isayama fell under immense pressure to end the anime in a way that would satisfy the now mainstream audience watching his story worldwide. Isayama felt this pressure, expressing multiple times his anxiety over how he should finish the series, scrapping multiple endings before arriving on the one that came to our screens earlier this month. If you don't want spoilers, this is your last chance to click off the video. From here, I'll discuss details pertaining to the ending. 3, 2... What? Huh? No! Man! You can't do this to me. This ending is divisive. When everyone had such different desires for how things should have went, and when so many people were deeply invested in this series, it was inevitable that any ending would become a point of contention for the fans. That said though, I personally believe this ending was a good one. It won't satisfy everyone, but it managed to tie a lot of the show's loose ends into a nice bow. Everyone has their own opinions on the ending, but as for me, there are a few aspects of it that just stand out more than others. Although it isn't obvious, these two scenes, Armin's conversation with Zeke and his conversation with Eren, represent two ideologies that are present throughout the entire series. We'll call these ideologies Erenism and Arminism. To understand Arminism, we can look at Armin's conversation with Zeke about purpose. Zeke, having lost to Eren and not really having anything else to do, is moping about how there's no point in doing anything.
In the end, the reason life survived was that it had the ability to multiply. In other words, the objective of living is to multiply.
Armin doesn't really entertain this speech and asks Zeke if there's any way for him to leave. Zeke doesn't think this necessary and asks him why he hasn't given up yet.
To keep multiplying? Is continuing the species that important to you? Why would it be bad to lose? Being alive means dying eventually.
In saying so, he almost manages to make Armin seem foolish for caring about anything at all. He presents a convincing outlook, and it's as though Armin is an idiot for not just giving up. He goes on to say that death might just bring relief, stating that
no longer being driven solely to multiply, never knowing what the point of it all is, might feel like being set free.
If you're anything like me, you started listing counter-arguments to what Zeke was saying. Although I felt inclined to disagree, in the moment it certainly feels like Zeke struck at a weak point. Armin thinks about this and then begins his response.
I was racing Eren and Mikasa, racing to the tree on the hill. Eren started running the moment after he suggested the race, and Mikasa deliberately lagged behind him. Of course, I was last. But the wind that day was slightly warm, and it felt so good just running. The wind stirred up all the dead leaves. In that moment, the thought entered my head that maybe I'd been born to race Mikasa and Eren up this hill. When I would read inside on rainy days, when I fed acorns to a squirrel, and when we walked around the market together, I felt the same way. I had the sense that these insignificant moments were incredibly precious.
That quote reflects Armin's outlook on life since the beginning of the series. The idea that maybe he was just born to experience a single moment. It answers Zeke's question of why multiply, since Armin wouldn't have had the chance to experience anything if not for that motivation to reproduce. You might feel like pointing out that Armin's life has been terrible, but whether it's the moments between his suffering or those amidst it, Armin asserts that all of them are what he was born to experience. The memories he describes weren't even important, at least not by most people's standards. But even though they seem inconsequential, Armin would argue that those moments matter the most when looking at the greater picture. As Armin gives his speech, he picks up an autumn leaf from the sand, a symbol representing the warm memory he's recounting. Zeke, having heard Armin's words, doesn't see the same object. He instead sees a baseball, a manifestation of an important memory within his past.
Oh, that's right. We would just throw the ball and catch it, and then throw it again. Just that, over and over. There was no point to it. But as you say, I would have been happy just playing catch forever.
There was no point to it, yet that's all it would have taken for him to be happy. I'd argue everyone has this thing, even if it's long buried in their past, maybe their childhood, maybe an interest smothered by others or reality. We don't just exist to multiply, like Zeke said. We exist for these moments, which are always happening. They're never telegraphed, and often they don't even feel important. And yet, as Armin puts it, they're incredibly precious. Realizing that the moment doesn't have to be significant, even something like a view, a simple conversation, or a walk somewhere, is what makes life worth looking forward to. Zeke feels redeemed by Armin's words, telling his mentor,
"If it meant I could play catch with you, I wouldn't mind being born again."
The thing that's so beautiful about Armin's outlook is it's so resolute, so independent, that other ideologies can't tarnish it. It doesn't make any statement about life's meaning, nor does it preach about a philosophy that should be adopted. Instead, it just presents a simplistic view of things, that at the end of the day, in spite of everything that happens to us, this moment is real. We're here just to be here right now as we are in the present, and we're here to have experienced what we did before and what we will in the future. In fact, this way of thinking doesn't dismiss anything negative that happens to us. It considers it a part of that reason. It's not a purpose, not a statement of meaning, but instead just a reason. We don't live to multiply, we multiply so that others can live. Mikasa seems to think this way as well. In her conversation with Ymir, she says she exists because of the lives Ymir created and thanks her. Both the cruelty and the beauty of the world, as Mikasa points out, are a reason to live. That's basically Arminism, the idea that each insignificant moment is what matters the most. Many people, Zeke included, failed to see this. And most tragically, Eren Yeager himself was too caught up in both the past and the future to think this way. We can see this in Eren's heart-to-heart with Armin just before the finale. In it, Eren is vulnerable with Armin and finally explains himself, including his mistakes and insecurities. Eren's fatal flaw was his inability to see what he had in the present, ever focusing on whatever was on the horizon that he would never reach. In becoming as obsessed with freedom as he did, he assured that he would never attain it. In other words, a slave to freedom. As Eren and Armin finally beheld the wonders of nature that they'd always imagined, you can tell Eren's mind is elsewhere. He and Armin gaze upon the fiery water and admire its beauty, yet not even a moment later, it doesn't hold Eren's attention anymore. This isn't really Eren's fault either, as later in the scene he expresses how much of a mess his head is because of the effects of the Founding Titan. The decision to give Eren the ability to see the past and future metaphorically and literally represents his inability to live in the present. Erenism is an analogy for the way in which humanity has long behaved. Eren lives in a future that'll never come, never satisfied nor grounded, and his way of thinking leads to unending cycles of war. Arminism is the antithesis to that, averse to war and seeking other solutions in order to enjoy the moment together. Armin points out the flaw in Eren's thinking when he holds the same shell he found in the ocean at the end of Season 3.
"What's that?" "So you finally notice it. It was at our feet the whole time, but you were always looking off into the distance."
The shell was always right there in front of him, but Eren never so much as glanced at it. Eren's focus was on the enemies, their remains as he picked up their hair and teeth. But Armin was able to appreciate the little things like the shell.
"I'm sure the hell we went through has happened over and over, but we need to think that despite it all, one day, we can eventually come to understand each other. And now no one will have any faith, not even in something as small as that. The only lesson they'll be left with is that they have to kill or be killed."
Armin's words here are those of the author. It's one of the defining through lines of his work. The dichotomy between these two extreme differences in thinking, even between best friends, is ultimately one of the greatest takeaways of Attack on Titan as a series. Since the start, Isayama has always had the intent of conveying the despair that comes with war, and this is his ultimate statement about where it'll get us. This is true until the very end, even in the credits of the anime, where there's a time-lapse of society being rebuilt, becoming more advanced and fighting in war all the same, never allowing the suffering of its participants to ever amount to anything. All of what happened in Attack on Titan, even if it couldn't have been prevented, is proof of just how senseless war is. Eren represents humanity, so focused on moving forward, so focused on killing, that the only thing he can see is the hair and teeth of those he's killed. And Armin is what we, as humans, could be. The hope that, despite it all, we can come to understand each other. The truth of life that we're here to build warm memories, whether they're the fleeting impressions of fall, or the childlike plans to cross the seas, and that maybe, one day, we can come to notice the shells at our feet.